I'm Ethan, I love muzzleloading. Today we're headed to Friendship, Indiana to the National Muzzleloading Rifle Association Spring Championship Shoot. We're going to be taking a walk through and getting a guided tour of Bob Woodfill's 200th anniversary of the Hawken rifle exhibit, documenting and sharing Hawken history from the beginnings of the fur trade up to and through the Hawken era by way of guiding us with recreation Hawken rifles by his hand and the hands of several others.
This is table 1. We have 8 tables here showing the progression of Hawken rifles through the years. And these would be some earliest ones, or rifles that were similar. So we can look here. This is the trade rifle. And actually, the fur trade started once the settlers landed in America. They traded otter and raccoon and that back east. But finally, you see the top hats over there. They came in style in France and right in England too. They made the best ones out of beaver hides. So that's what propelled the fur trade and all the activities that happened since then. This is the first rifle built by Jake and Sam in St. Louis. Now they built some in Maryland and Ohio before they came to St. Louis. But this was the first one that was built in St. Louis, and it was built for General Ashley in 1822-23. It's a 69 caliber. And what the purpose was, once the mountain men had trapped their beaver and had dried them, they put them on keel boats and they came down the Missouri River. But the Indians, particularly up in South Dakota, along the cliffs would shoot at them with these early trade guns which had no rifling, but they caused, some problems and hit some men. So Colonel Ashley, General Ashley, when he went back, once Sam came to St. Louis in 1822, over that winter, 1822-23, he asked Jake and Sam to make him a really big Hawken. And this was called the Big Hawken. And unfortunately, I never saw the original rifle, so this is kind of a rendition of what I thought it looked like. But this is 69 caliber, and it was Flintlock. And what they do is they'd fire that into the line of the Indians, and once that big old 600 grain ball was bouncing around, it kind of discouraged the Indians from attacking them. Down here, I should show you that. This would be a Flintlock pistol that was prominent during those days. And yes, the Hawken brothers made pistols, but they didn't make them from scratch like they did their rifles. Actually, what they did was they bought parts from Belgium and put them together, just like the modern gunsmiths do. One gun the keel boats did have on them were these swivel cannons. And those were on the keel boats as they came down the river with all the furs. That's a beaver hide that put on a drying stick there. So that was donated by Mark Briar, and the top hats were donated by Mark also. I forgot about him. And they used to belong to Tom Dawson, who you're all familiar with down here. And that's where it started. There's a lot more to be told about that. And really, the earliest ones, we don't know very much, to be honest with you. This is table number 2. You can tell by the sign there. And this is J&S, Jake and Sam Mountain Rifles. And some of them were pre-1825 when they became a partnership. You can see there's a couple Flintlocks here, and these are people's renditions of what the early Flintlocks of that period looked like. This has a pineapple patch box. This has a very elaborate patch box. Actually, this gun was made by Tom Dawson and gave it to Andy Baker years ago. And by hook or by crook, I ended up with it. And this top rifle is my rendition of what a rifle would look like during that period. It's a .54 caliber flint, and you can see it has a sling. And so I really think the early mountain men carried the rifles in a sling. It was handy. They were on horseback part of the time, but the barrel was a little shorter. It had a patch box, it had a flintlock, and that's my rendition. Mark Briar contributed this. This is a hunting bag and horn of that period, the J&S rifles. These were made by Andy Baker. And of course, Andy was an excellent leather worker. And that's just historical we put here. Okay. Some of the stuff that they saw first were the elk. And they needed a pretty good gun to shoot those. And that's when the 50s and 45 calibers kind of became obsolete. They needed about a 54 caliber to shoot those. Okay, this is table number 3. These are actually some early J&S Hawken rifles of the 1830s to the 40s. And again, like I say, the partnership between Jake and Sam came about in 1825, but we have no rifles of that period. Some of the rifles I've shown in this period being J&S rifles, 2 of them here, well, 4 of them, 4 out of the 5 have patch boxes on them. The early J&S rifles had patch boxes and cap boxes on them, but the cap boxes were pretty big. And this I donate to the generation of Jake Hawken, because Jake carried along a lot of the, what would I say, his habits by making Pennsylvania, Kentucky rifles. And Jake did this, did some of the engraving on them. This one has a reinforcing plate back here, because on all rifles, you know, muzzleloaders tend to break right through the wrist. And we actually have some in which he put that on them, or another gunsmith did later on. This down here are 2 of what I call the buffalo rifles. There's only 4 Hawkens that have a buffalo engraved on them. This is one of them. And this is an engraving of the buffalo. It's not real good, but it is an engraving. Now, there's only 4 of those known, so these are kind of rare. This is table number 4, And we've described this period as rare J and S rifles, that were Jake and Sam Hawken rifles, and it would be during the 1840s. And actually this is where Jake was the most prolific, made the most rifles. He had a style that looked just like this, had the comb come over and the cheek piece on the other side came right up to here. The panels were a little longer and beefier. And again, like I say, it models some of the early Pennsylvania Kentucky rifles that he was used to building. I have two really interesting rifles of this period. Some of the earliest ones were full stock. And why they were full stock was they were cheaper. The full stock sold for $17 and the half stock sold for $25. And you know, somebody just didn't want to invest in that. Now this one right here is a famous Medina rifle. And Mario Medina, who was a mountain man, carried that rifle. It was originally a 50 caliber barrel, but when Sam Hawken was in Denver in 1859, Mario Medina was very influential in the Colorado area. He sent his kids to school in Denver, and he had a trading post and all that. But he took this gun to Sam, and by then the barrel was worn out, and he just had a new barrel put on. Instead of a 50 like the original one was, he got a 58 caliber because the buffalo hunting starting in that period became more prominent because the beaver trade had fallen off because in Europe they changed style and there wasn't a demand for the fur hats. They went to silk hats is what the deal was. This is an unusual rifle in that it has this little spur on it back here. And a lot of Jake and Sam's trigger guards had those, but they were what we call sporting rifles. And they were not necessarily a step down in quality, but there was just a step down in the number of components used. And they made those for local trades where the guys would hunt deer, bear, and you know, things of that variety. But those would be some rare J&S variation that came about during that period. Now we move into the 1850s, and truly the Hawken rifle of the 1850s is an iconic rifle. When people think of Hawkens, they think of Hawkens that look like this, not like the early rifles. And this is kind of a variety of Hawken rifles. Now, this was right after the 49ers. The 49ers had stopped in St. Louis and picked up some rifles to take out to California during the gold rush. And these would be some rifles that could or could not have been during this time. As you can see, the trigger guard here is a little more oval than the square one of the J&S Hawken, which the top one is. See how it's close to the wrist. These are farthest from the wrist. And as Jim Keebler says, these give more positive hold. Here are a few variations of the rifles that Sam made. Jake died in 1849 of cholera. and the business went to Jake since he was a partner, and he continued to make rifles, but he kind of streamlined them, and none of the parts were homemade there in the shop. He purchased them, the furniture, from Eastern sources, and I've seen all the parts in a catalog that he purchased them from. Now, this bottom rifle I'm going to start with here is what I call a short S Hawken. And the barrel will be from 24 inches up to 30, and it will be considerably less length and quite a bit less weight than a regular Hawken. And what these were they're very popular with, believe it or not, the Indians and the mountain men, because they could carry them on a horse in a scabbard. And so that's why the shorter barrel. In my book, I did some research on that, and researched 3 feet, head on 3 feet, 3.5, 4 feet long, and actually there's a little loss of velocity and a little loss of energy, but they shoot just the same. They shoot it just the same. This would be a typical S Hawken of that period. It has the 2 barrel keys, a steel or an iron nose cap, comes back here to this very nicely shaped bolster, and has a pretty standardized lock that is flat and the hammer is flat. And this was, when people think of a Hawken, they think of a Hawken like this. Now, I made this one with a little more fiddleback in it because people who purchase Hawkens want the fiddleback in them. But actually, Hawkens were very, very plain on the wood because of strength. They wanted all the strength possible. So until the later days, to the Gimmer days, they didn't put much figure in the wood. This one happens to have a pineapple patch box, which was more characteristic of the J&S, but it probably has some parts laying around the shop and they wanted to use them up, and they put them on these guns. The barrel length on these, like I say, was 34 to 36 inches, but they have some that were 24 and some are 30. Now, the ones that are 30, there's two kinds. There's some that had the full 36-inch barrel that the Indians cut off after the second thimble, and we have some examples of those. I don't have one made here. And you can definitely tell the barrel was cut off, and they cut it off so they could take it on a horse. Actually, I think Sam Hawken made some 30-inch that has a different thimble spacing. And I don't think collectors have recognized this. But I built, over the years, probably 75 or more Hawkens. And I know the wood, I know the features, I can kind of tell myself whether Sam or Jake made it. So I have a little experience, and I suggest to the collectors this is another group. And there's some out there, but we have our difference of opinion. This book is available through the NMLRA, and you can purchase it there. Now, I happen to turn here to the Sam Hawken chapter, and basically in the book, I go through all of these stages and show you examples of trigger guards, butt plates, hammers, and all that. And I did a lot of testing of rifles, and so forth and so on. If you get around 2 inches at 100 yards with open sights, that's pretty good shooting. In other words, it's not like a bench rest rifle. So this book is available through the NMLRA, and during this period, Sam Hawken also, there marks Sam Hawken, there were some pistols. Now, except for a few of the very earliest pistols, none of these were made by the Hawken shop. The Hawken shop wouldn't sell any guns that they didn't make, but there was such a demand for them, they bought parts from Belgium and assembled them. And oftentimes they were in smaller calibers, like 47 to 49. And basically they were for personal protection. But as you can see, this one has a little loop on the end, which would be characteristic of that period. This is a mount of a full grizzly bear that I shot up in British Columbia several years ago. And unfortunately, I didn't shoot him with a muzzleloader, I shot him with a cartridge rifle. But people ask how much of these bears weigh. And we actually weighed this one because we got to put him in a cattle carrier, and I weighed him, and he weighed 650 pounds. These were hard to kill by the earliest pioneers, and especially the mountain men who encountered them more than anybody, because he's a pretty good sized bear, and if you were shooting a 50 caliber, you probably were not going to kill this animal. He could absorb a lot of energy. This table I've named the Gemmer rifles. And how the Gemmer Hawkens came into business is after about 1859, Sam went to Colorado chasing gold and trying to pan some gold. But he wasn't successful, so he came back to downtown Denver and opened a gun shop. That's when some of these rifles were made. I call them Gemmer rifles. In 1861, Sam sold the business to several employees, of which Watts, Gemmer, and other people were some of the workmen there, and they purchased them. Well, the biggest guy was J.P. Gemmer, and he finally purchased the entire shop from Sam. They made a variety of rifles during this period, of which I'm going to show you some. His mark, or particular rifle that he made, was like this top one. This would be Gemmer. The top one is an example of Gemmer's work, and as you can see, they became fancier. They had adjustable rear sights with a little ladder rear sight, and the stock was generally lighter. It wasn't dark like the early ones were. These others were carried by the mountain men, and these guns tended to be target rifles. The Gemmer rifle the stock shape is like all three of these, but Gemmer liked the cap box. And so these all have cap boxes. And of course, we're now firmly into the percussion era, and caps would be appropriate. Still had double set triggers, 2 barrel keys, iron nose cap, sights, and everything was the same. Now we're getting near the end of the Gemmer period. We're into the beginnings of the Civil War. These rifles would be made in the 1860s during the Civil War, American Civil War. And what they did was they took some military rifles and made them look like Hawkens. In other words, as you can see this one up here, it looks like a Hawken. It has two barrel keys, the same butt plate, the same buttstock, but it's of a cartridge rifle, a cartridge action. And that happens to be a Springfield trapdoor action. So they went from having to muzzleload them, which was slow, till they could just slip a cartridge in, and generally were 45-70. That was a whole lot easier. And there was a real push to go to these. Like I said, it happened right after and during the Civil War. This is another trapdoor Springfield. You can see the side, the same action. And I should flick that open for you here. You can maybe recognize it a little better. They just slid the cartridge in this. And of course, this was favored because you didn't have to do muzzleloading. All you had to do was use brass cartridges. But again, it was a single shot. That takes you up and through the 1860s and the different styles that you would see in a Hawken rifle. Now, they still call them a Hawken rifle because they were, Hawken made them, but they had different actions. They weren't necessarily muzzleloaders. They were into the cartridge period. And this rifle, the trapdoor Springfield, in caliber 45-70, had about as much energy and killing power as a 54 caliber Hawken. So they were equivalent, but the trend was towards cartridges, not muzzleloaders, and that's why these won out and these were not made. They weren't that common.
What we have here is part of the display. Hawken rifles were expensive, and after the Civil War, as we look at Manifest Destiny or through the 1840s and on with the Westward expansion, firearms were a part of everyday life. And for those that couldn't afford a Hawken rifle, a lot of times it would be something that was Army surplus, which we still see. So we go from the early Flintlocks, work our way up through to percussion ones, and they provided a good serviceable firearm. The early 1832 is a Flintlock conversion, Springfield Armory. The Harper's Ferry, these are both 69 calibers, and this one is from a contract maker out of Windsor, Vermont. And then the 1863 Springfield, and you can see they've been adapted in a number of ways. What I found particularly interesting about this one is, first you might wonder what this is. Well, imagine you're sitting on a horse, put this down on your foot on the stirrup, and it makes it easier to load. So by the time you get up, we know our problem with so many percussion guns is you're always dropping the caps. So someone was very inventive, and they put this little leather apparatus here, and that is to hold your musket caps. As Bob had pointed out, having an additional firearm was quite helpful, and so the small English pocket pistols with the captured ramrods, so that you didn't have a tendency to lose them, were pretty handy to have. The ones here are 54 caliber, so they would have gone with your rifle. Another English pocket pistol, period axe, all in various accoutrements that they might have carried with them. And of course, as the opportunities came in more brass cartridges, there was the variety. These would have, after Civil War, there's a Remington rolling block in 50-70. This is a Sharp's percussion conversion to 50-70. They're both saddle ring carbines. A trapdoor Springfield that had been cut down to make it easier to handle. Regular rolling block by Remington for the sporting firearm, and then a Sharp's bore shot. The early Colt revolver, model 1849, and another military piece. This had been the 1832 model pistol, originally a Flintlock, and this was a contract gun redone by Waters out of Massachusetts, conversion on the lock, also 54 caliber. Would have gone, again, our captured ramrod. Pretty clever. So the trapper, the adventurer, the explorer, the individual heading west, if he'd had several of those all in the same caliber as his rifle, they were pretty well outfitted. For those that couldn't afford the better firearms, there was the alternative. And of course, the common double-barrel shotgun was popular with trappers, traders, adventurers, explorers alike, because it fits so many different situations well. It was an exciting and perilous time, and this manifest destiny, a lot of it couldn't have been accomplished without a variety of firearms and available to the common man. For defense, food on the table, just fun and enjoyment, and today they provide a wonderful field of collecting, or when you're teaching and working with youngsters. The unique things, this Harper's Ferry in particular says Sergeant J.D. Boyd. I don't know if you can pick that up or not. I've tried to research that and I can't find it. But when you're introducing youngsters to history and you hand them a piece of it like this and go, well, what if it could talk? And that's what makes so many of these absolutely fascinating. What story could they tell?
Our last item we want to share with you is shown here. I have 4 rifles, and actually these 4 rifles fit in that wood box. And I might mention that the wood box was made for me as an authentic wood box, has tongue and groove corners. It was made by Eric Morrison. The reason for the sturdiness of the box was that all 4 of these rifles were placed inside the box and shipped to outposts in the frontier. Some places that they were sent was Fort Laramie up in Laramie, Wyoming. It's just north of Torrington, Wyoming. Bent's Fort down in southern Colorado. It was on the Santa Fe Trail. And actually that one was probably the most popular. There were more Hawkens sent down there during the buffalo days, because that's when the Hawken really came into its own. Wagon bosses and scouts, some of the mountain men became scouts and explorers for the wagon trains. They needed a gun that would shoot a buffalo a day. It took about a buffalo a day to feed the wagon train. And this is some examples of the rifles they used. Now, to kill a buffalo at 200 yards, it can be done with a 54 caliber, but they generally had a 62 or a 66 caliber. And they would aim at the hump of the back. The ball would drop about 4 inches and go through the lungs. So that was the procedure and why these guns came about. And to be quite honest, there were more Hawkens of this style made during the buffalo hunting days, which were after the Civil War. They were along the Santa Fe Trail and in southern Colorado. That's why they were. This particular set of guns I made from parts that Art Russell had when he had the Hawken shop in St. Louis. And so it's assembly to show what it looked like, and I put the label on there where it was going. But that's a very authentic looking box, and these are 4 S. Hawken rifles of the 1850s, maybe going a little bit into the 60s, that were shipped out to the outpost. Again, the rifles just sold for $25, these half stocks. So the long full stock one is $17, which was also sent. Were very popular. I think we've gone through this now, and I encourage you to purchase my book. I've gone through each stage and each development of the Hawken rifle, give you a lot of pictures and a lot of ideas. But it basically covers what I just covered. I want to thank Ethan Yazel and Mike Yazel for helping make this exhibit happen, and we want to share information with you. We're not interested in making any money or anything, but we're afraid this information will get lost if it goes another generation, because there's only a few old guys like me left around that do this. And in the 1960s, there were quite a few of them. And these are the people I learned from: Tom Dawson, Andy Baker, people like that. And we don't want it to go another generation and all this information gets lost. We hope it helped you, and I hope you got educated a little. Thank you.
I was watching all this.